I took a short vacation last Christmas to see my family over the holidays. Plan was to meet some of my family at our cabin a few hours south of the city, right in between where me and the rest of my family lived. It was just a quiet mountain cabin my parents have had for years that we often met up at for vacations or getaways. A little wooden home with a fireplace and a view of the woods. It was always peaceful, and really, that was all I wanted. This wasn't going to be some big Christmas get-together either. My family was small, just me, my parents, and my sister. But since I was driving alone, I decided to plan for 5 days, 4 to spend with my family and 1 that I could spend there alone. I arrived 3 days before Christmas, late in the afternoon. The sky was already darkening when I parked, and the woods behind the cabin were already covered in a haze from the sun setting. I only had a couple hours before getting to bed, so I just walked through the cabin, unpacked, and took a nice long shower, then slept through the night. I think it had been over a year since the last time any of us from the family had been to the cabin. But because I had barely been there before by myself, there was no way to know if anything was really wrong with it. I figured I'd just let my parents deal with that when they got here, though, and from a quick glance, nothing seemed to be off about the place. It was as nice and peaceful as I'd hoped, and the following day was my one and only full day to spend alone at the cabin. So I wanted to make it worthwhile. I got up early, made a hot cup of coffee, and took it with me on a walk around the woods. There was a rugged footpath from all the walks we'd taken over the years. It was maybe a 2-mile loop just through the trees and back to the cabin. That morning it was fairly cold outside, and there was a thin layer of snow on the ground that had fallen overnight. The woods were very quiet. Really, all I heard was wind flowing through the trees, but I only made it half a mile in before seeing some strange scuffs in the snow right on the trail. Thought it might have been a deer or other animal. But further down there were more clear prints showing they were shoe prints. Very distinct, too, like they'd been made not long ago. I looked around. Nobody should have been out in these woods, especially this close onto our property. The prints seemed to follow the trail for a while, and as I continued along it, I just started getting uneasy about it and decided to turn back. I was sure it was nothing, just a hunter walking around, or maybe someone else had a cabin near there, but I wanted to be safe and just head back. I definitely didn't want to run into anyone out there in the middle of nowhere. That was pretty much all that was on my mind the whole walk back, trying to figure out why someone was out there. Finally seeing the cabin, I walked up to the front door and almost choked on my coffee. There were shoe prints going right up to the door. It came from the other way where the trail ended and came back around. Obviously, they weren't there before. So that means whoever was out here had been right outside the cabin just minutes ago. I frantically looked around, feeling like someone was watching me, but all I saw was an empty snowy forest all around me. After a few seconds, the tension got too much for me to handle, and I quickly got inside and locked the door. My heart was racing. The chances of this happening was nearly 0. And on the one day that I was here alone was even less likely. It felt like this couldn't possibly be a coincidence. And the thing is, when I left the cabin to go for a short walk, I didn't lock it because why the hell would I need to, for just going on a quick walk on my own property out in the middle of an isolated forest. I felt extremely uncomfortable, but I really hoped I was just overreacting. Like whoever that was just saw the trail led to a cabin and checked through the windows if it was abandoned or something, then just left when they saw I wasn't. It was still creepy as hell, though. I called my parents to let them know about what was going on just in case. They said that maybe I should spend the night at a hotel and wait for them to get there tomorrow just so I wasn't alone. My mom also seemed more nervous about it than I was, which is saying a lot, but I decided to stay. I was still going to be cautious, not opening the doors anymore and just staying inside for the rest of the day. Pretty bad decision looking back on it. The day dragged on. I wanted this to be a peaceful, relaxing day alone. But knowing that I might not be alone out there made it the complete opposite of relaxing. I was more paranoid than anything. I sat in the living room by the fireplace for most of the day, drinking coffee to keep me awake. Even though I was tired, I didn't want to sleep. Closing my eyes didn't feel safe, like something could happen if I didn't stay alert. Slowly the day started coming to an end, and the sun started getting lower, and eventually it was dark out again. An eerie calmness fell over the woods around the cabin. It was just the crackling fireplace lighting up the small room I was in. Even after all those hours, I was still thinking about those footprints coming up to the cabin. And as I got more and more tired, knowing I needed to sleep at some point, I was desperate for a way to somehow know if I was safe, like a sign that they were really gone. And somehow it wasn't until that moment that I thought about checking to see where the footprints led after reaching the cabin. Like if they turned around and went back toward the trail, or just off into the woods, which would have been incredibly creepy. I got up and creaked open the front door. It was pitch black and silent outside. The woods out front were too ominous to look at without getting chills. I looked down at the still frozen shoe prints in the snow. Even just seeing them again gave me a really bad gut feeling. I looked for the shoe prints leading away and kept looking, and slowly I could feel my face getting pale as I couldn't find any shoe prints leading away from the cabin. They went right up to the door, then just disappeared at the doorway, and that's when it hit me. Me leaving the cabin unlocked and the footprints not leaving. I slowly turned around, looking into the dark, flickering orange glow inside the cabin from the fireplace. Someone was in here with me. Someone had been in there with me all day. Almost right on cue, I heard a slight creak down the hall. I leaned my body forward enough to look down the hall toward the bedrooms. My bedroom door was open, and a man was in the middle of the hall slowly creeping toward the living room I was in. As soon as he saw me, he froze for a moment before bolting down the hallway at me. I took my keys off the wall and sprinted to my car, getting in and leaving immediately. By the time I felt far enough to look in the mirror, the cabin wasn't even lit up by my back headlights anymore. It was just a void of black behind me. I got into the nearest town and had police take my report and check out the cabin. Of course, the man wasn't there when the officers looked. They did find some scuffs on the floor in the bedroom, though inside the small standing closet, so they think he was hiding in there all day, waiting for me to go to bed and fall asleep. But what really makes it that much creepier is that's all we know. No idea who he was or what he wanted to do to me. I mean, what if it was someone I knew that knew I'd be going to that cabin alone for a day? The coincidence of it all seems like a lot, but I really hope that's all it is, and that I'll never have to encounter that man again. I was somewhere in northern Oregon when it happened. I don't remember the exact highway. It wasn't one of the main ones, just one of those empty back roads surrounded by miles of dense forest. I'd been driving for hours with the music low and the windows cracked to keep myself awake. This was supposed to be a pretty standard road trip, I guess, just seeing a few places, driving around and clearing my head from all the noise. Nothing too exciting. I've been paying relatively close attention to my gas gauge, checking every so often and trying to fill it up when it was around 1/4 of a tank. But I guess this time I pushed it too far. When the warning light came on, I figured I still had plenty of miles left to make it to the next gas station. I even checked my phone for the next station and put my directions on it, and it said 45 minutes away. Not ideal, but I thought I would still be fine. Definitely was slightly nervous, though, seeing as there were no other closer options, even if I were to do a U-turn. Anyway, I kept driving, glancing down at my phone a while later and seeing it was at 35 minutes. Then I checked again, maybe a few minutes later, seeing it still said 35 minutes. I remember staring at that number wondering if it was even accurate anymore. Surely it was just an error or something. I checked another couple minutes later, and that's when I fully realized that the GPS wasn't updating at all. It was stuck at the 35-minute mark, and the little car icon wasn't moving either. I started messing with my phone, trying to reset the directions and clicking every button. But before I could get it working, my car sputtered. I felt my stomach drop. I hoped it was just a quick one-time thing from being low on fuel and not empty. Only got 30 seconds further before it sputtered again and completely cut out. Wouldn't turn back on even in the slightest. I coasted to the shoulder of the road and sat there in silence for a minute, unable to believe the situation I knew I was in. I looked around at the place I'd ended up basically trapped at. The forest on either side of me was dark and lifeless, no lights at all, and a dense fog covering the top of the trees. It gave me chills as I sat there looking at it. I felt eerily alone. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but it took me about 10 seconds to see why my GPS had gotten stuck, and now why my calls wouldn't go through. I had no service, like zero service whatsoever. I put my head in my hands for a second, realizing how screwed I was, then got out of my car. I figured if my phone GPS had been frozen at 35 minutes for a while, I could have been just 10 to 15 minutes from the gas station. I mean, I had no way to know how long it was frozen for. If I was lucky, I could walk to the gas station and make it in half an hour or something. What other choice did I have anyway? I grabbed a small flashlight from the glove compartment, then manually locked the car with my key and started walking down the road. It was empty and quiet, but not in the peaceful way. In the I can barely see anything through the fog in pitch darkness kind of way. The forest on either side of me was so unnervingly quiet and dark. Every time I glanced over, my eyes would be looking all around at the shadows that filled the areas between the trees, making every small thing look like something I knew it wasn't. It was just my imagination filling in the darkness with shapes that weren't there. So I tried to not even look. I kept my eyes forward, looking at the endless road ahead. My flashlight was nice to have, but I barely made it 10 FT in front of me with all the fog on the road. But about 5 minutes in, I heard something. It was a few cracks of branches. Definitely not wind or just trees swaying. It was something snapping a couple of branches, either by stepping on them or I don't know. I stopped walking. The forest went dead silent. I pointed my flashlight out there and stared into the darkness. The longer I looked, though, the more uneasy I got, seeing those shapes again and knowing something could be out there looking back at me. Like if I continued to stare for too long, something would happen. So I looked away and kept walking, a little more rushed, though, at least to get away from that area. A few minutes later, I noticed something on the right side of the road up ahead. At first, all I could see was a large shape laying near the trees. Thought it might have just been a fallen tree or something. But as I got closer and could get my flashlight to light it up a bit, I realized it was a car. An old beat-up sedan halfway lodged into the forest way past the shoulder of the road. But strangely, it didn't really look like it had crashed there. Looked more like whoever it was had driven it slowly down to the edge of the tree line and then just left it there. The driver's side door was opened slightly, and the car looked like it had been there for a while, weeks or months even, and it was far enough off the road that unless you were walking along the secluded stretch like I was, then there was no way any cars passing by would notice it. Seeing that car lit up in my flashlight made me really disturbed. The thought that someone else had been here, maybe also run out of gas or broken down or whatever. And whatever happened afterward clearly wasn't good if the car was still abandoned here. I didn't call out or shine my flashlight into the trees. I don't know why, but again, I had this overwhelming feeling that if I looked for too long, something terrible would happen. And just when I thought that and realized I needed to keep moving, there was another sound from the woods. A rustle in the bushes near one of the trees behind the car, and then another. I turned instinctively toward the noise, and for a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me again. But no, I saw something. Not clearly, not faces or details, just figures moving between the trees. More than one, a group of people running through the forest just outside of view. My whole body went cold. I started speed while walking down the road. Not running. I almost had this instinctual thought that I didn't want to look like prey and show I was panicked by sprinting, but I walked faster than normal. I tried to act like I didn't hear the footsteps that started to match my pace in the forest. Multiple sets crunching through the forest, following me along the tree line. I was genuinely too afraid to shine my light over there or even look, scared of what I'd see. And somehow through all of that going on, I never even heard or noticed a truck driving up behind me. Wasn't until the pickup truck stopped right next to me, and a man yelled through the roll-down window that I got startled and realized he was even there. It was some regular-looking dusty pickup truck, and the man looked maybe 50 with gray in his beard. He looked tired but not necessarily threatening. "You stranded. What are you doing walking around out here? You're a long way from anything." I was so shaken, I just answered truthfully, saying my car ran out of gas and that I hoped I could walk to the nearest gas station. The man almost let out a short smirk like I was crazy. "Hop in. I'll take you to the station. Think you're a lot further than you think you are." During this whole conversation, every sound and movement in the forest had stopped, and it was dead silent again. It was like everything paused for those 30 seconds. I hesitated but decided to get in. Hitchhiking out there in the middle of nowhere was not something I ever thought I'd do. But the alternative of staying alone out there on the side of the road with whatever the hell was going on seemed worse to me. Felt like it was a risk either way, but it paid off. The old man really was just trying to help, and he seemed just as cautious as I was about the whole hitchhiking thing. He said he never offered rides, but that he lived on a farm an hour north and takes this road a lot, and had never seen someone like me wandering at night like that, and knew something could be really wrong. I didn't mention what I'd seen or heard out in the forest, not wanting to sound like an insane person. The drive to the gas station took way longer than I thought, nearly 25 minutes. Would have taken me hours to walk there, if I even made it past that forest. And when we got to the gas station, the man gave me a pat on the shoulder and wished me luck. That was it. No weirdness, no strange comments, just a guy helping someone out. I headed in and bought a gas tank, then took the clerk's advice to call the police to help me out now that I had service. He said the sheriff's office around here was kind and would give me a lift back to my car and make sure everything was okay. Thank God I did, because getting dropped back off at my car at night alone would have been awful. And when the cop drove me there, we found my car except it had been moved. It was off the shoulder and on the edge of the forest, almost exactly like the other car I'd found out there. Someone or that group had pushed my car down there like they didn't want anyone else to see it. That's when I told the officer everything. Anyway, that whole night became a mess. But to sum it up, the police wrote a report and did a bit of searching, but nothing came of it. No suspects, no nearby houses, and no one else had seen or heard anything. Even the other car they found had no plates on it or identifying information. There's really no saying what those people out in the forest were there for or what they would have done if that pickup truck hadn't shown up exactly when it did. I was on a small vacation over New Year's to see my 2 brothers and a couple good friends of mine at my hometown. To be perfectly upfront, I never liked my hometown, moved away as soon as I was able. It was a real small, out-of-the-way town with no cities or even neighboring towns for miles and miles. Everything was outdated and run down, and the only ones living there were people who had been there all their lives. My brothers and friends were the only reason I ever came back to visit. Usually I'd stay at one of my brothers' places for the week, but this year both of them now had girlfriends that live with them, so I really didn't feel like being the third wheel. The only hotel in the town was a real small family hotel right off the gravel highway. I don't think it even had a name, it was just hotel. I arrived there pretty late. The parking lot was empty except for one old truck. When I walked inside, the lobby was dim, lit by a single lamp behind the counter. An older man, 60s maybe, scruffy beard and hair grown out unevenly, stood up from a chair when he saw me. It looked like I had startled him or that he wasn't expecting me. But after a moment he said, "Need a room." His voice was low and rough. He gave me a key and showed me to the room at the end of the hallway. Inside this hotel it was very old. Not like it was falling apart, but old enough that it felt kind of dirty. The room was small too, just a bed right in the middle with a TV in front of it. Figured it didn't matter since I was only going to be here to sleep and would be spending the days with my friends and family. I left everything packed and took a quick shower, then passed out on the bed. However, I woke up sometime around 3:00 a.m. to a soft knocking, not at my door, at the far end of the hallway. I laid there listening to it through the thin walls. Spaced out, quiet, slow knocks, then silence, then a few more. It kind of sounded like an old wooden door opening and closing, the knocks being the low thuds against the door frame. I didn't know what was going on out there, but this wasn't exactly a five-star place, so I didn't bother caring. I fell back asleep after a while. When I got up in the morning, I went to grab coffee from the lobby before heading out, but the lobby was empty. Not a coffee bar or anything. Even the front desk was empty. No sign of the old man or anyone else working there. Felt a little strange, but I shrugged it off and left to go spend the day with my brothers. I was out for a long time. I think it wasn't until 9-ish that I got back to the hotel. Once again, just that one truck was in the parking lot. When I walked in, the lobby lights were off now, and the whole place felt colder. Still no signs of the old man. I walked down the hallway and into my room, locking the door and changing into more comfortable clothes for the night. And that's when I heard it again, those strange thud or knocking sounds. It was only a couple before it stopped and was quiet again, but this time it sounded like it was right outside of my room. I went over and cracked the door open just enough to peer into the hallway and see what was going on. Only had a second to notice the door right next to mine was slightly open now before the man's voice called to me from down the hallway. It made me jump. He called out asking me to come down to the lobby, and before I could respond, he walked back out of view of the hallway. He didn't say why or anything. It was super weird, but I felt like I had to go down there and see what he wanted. Maybe there was a problem with my room or something. I walked down the hallway. The place was still quiet. I knew I had to be the only one staying in this hotel right now. When I got to the end, he wasn't there. The lobby was still dark, and I didn't even hear him walking around anywhere. I got a really bad feeling standing there in the lobby. I didn't like knowing that I was alone in there, even if he likely didn't have any bad intentions. After a few seconds, I decided to just hurry back to my room. I stayed up a bit later that night, but never heard any signs of the man being inside the hotel. It's like he just left after I saw him at the end of the hallway. In the morning, I went and saw my friends and mentioned the strangeness of the hotel I was staying at. All of them were confused. They seemed to all agree that they had heard something about that hotel closing down a year or two ago. None of them were sure, though, and said if I was staying there, then surely they were wrong. I spent the whole day with them heading back late in the night. As I drove there, I couldn't help but think about the possibility that the place was actually vacant or shut down. But it just couldn't be. The lights and water in my room worked, and the old guy working there wouldn't be there to give me a room if it wasn't open. I pulled into the same site as the previous 2 nights, an empty parking lot with just the one truck. I walked inside a little more cautiously this time. Still, the lights were mostly off, and I heard nothing at all. I started walking down to my room, and when I got up to the door, I froze. It was cracked open. I creaked the door open further. The room was dark, and honestly, I was terrified to even enter. I saw my suitcase, which was still mostly packed, and decided to quickly run in and grab it. Everything else I had left in there was worth leaving, like a toothbrush and random stuff like that I didn't care about. Definitely not enough to risk staying there any longer. I started to hurry out of there. Something in my gut told me I needed to get out of there immediately. I got down to the end of the hallway and into the dark lobby when I happened to look back at where I came from. I don't know if I'd unconsciously heard something or if I just had a feeling too, but when I looked back, I felt my whole body go numb. I saw the old man peering out from the doorway to my room, staring down at me. I ran to my car and drove to one of my brother's places. He urged me to call the police just to get the whole story straight. Even if it was just a worker snooping around my hotel room, it was worth reporting. But what we found was a lot worse. My friends were right. That place was vacant. Not necessarily abandoned, though. It was still connected to the power grid and everything, but the owners of the land shut it down and moved away and sort of just left it there. And when the cops searched the place, they found no signs that the old man was there. Even that old truck that was there on all 3 days I was there was gone now. And actually, it seemed like the police didn't even believe me. Like they thought I was a crazy person that was using the abandoned hotel as a free place to stay and just hallucinated the guy. They didn't say that outright, but I could just tell by the way they were talking to me. It made me feel even worse about that whole town. I stayed at my brother's place for the next few days, then gladly left town and headed back home. Absolutely the strangest, most confusing, and legitimately horrifying experience I've ever had. Thinking back on it is almost worse. Knowing what I was in the middle of, and how close I probably was to never being seen again, had I not realized something was wrong, and left in a hurry. This happened around Christmas. I live alone with my daughter in a rather secluded and heavily wooded area. We only have a handful of neighbors, mostly people that live in cottage type of houses like us. I work from home, so I only leave the property to drop off or pick up my daughter, and of course for groceries and stuff like that. Not much goes on in the area, which is why I allow my daughter to play in the woods with her friends nearby. As long as she comes home before the curfew I set out for her. One evening, however, something went wrong. My daughter wasn't answering my calls or texts. I was worried as hell after the recent snowfall. I suspected her and her friends were just trying to push their luck with the curfew. I sat out on the front porch, half pissed off and half worried to death, waiting for her to come home. "Hey, you're late." "I know, Dad. I'm sorry. I just lost track of time." "How do you lose track of the sun?" "Well, actually, we were inside mostly." "Inside? Whose house was it?" "I want to know who to call." "It wasn't anyone's house." "Then where were you?" "You're not going to believe me, but we found a real-life gingerbread house in the woods. What, there was even a gingerbread man living inside it. We asked if we could play in his house, and he said we could, but only as his fairies. So, we dressed up as fairies and then played inside for like 3 hours. And during all this time, you didn't think to look at your phone even once. Well, the gingerbread man said fairies aren't supposed to have phones. "You're getting too old to be this bad at lying. Just get inside before you freeze to death." Obviously, the whole gingerbread bull crap seemed a little far-fetched. Over the course of the rest of the night, I pressed her about it. Yet she stuck to her guns. Eventually, I just went along with it, but it never sat right with me. I just didn't want it to blow up into a whole thing she would end up hating me forever for. The very next evening, though, when she brought it up again, I was not going to let it slide. Interestingly, she told me about it beforehand, as if she was asking for permission to go to this alleged gingerbread house. Even though it was a little later than I usually let her go out, I decided to agree to it just to see where it led. When she left, I secretly followed her, At first she went down the same old path towards the neighbors, but after she met up with her friends they took an odd turn. It was down a trail that I was not familiar with. It became narrower as the evening turned darker. Then suddenly the girl stopped. Quickly, I hid behind a tree before they spotted me. When they started talking again, I took a peek, and sure enough, in spite of everything I was thinking, there was an honest-to-God real-life gingerbread house right there in the middle of the woods, 10 FT off the ground, but built like something straight out of a fairy tale. I couldn't believe my eyes, but my astonishment was far from over. Standing up under the house, the girls dragged the box into the open. From it, they pulled out cheap fairy costumes and put them on. Then they started climbing up the ladder to the entrance. I couldn't get a good look at them from the ground, but someone opened the door for them. Then they disappeared inside. At this point, I was so freaked out. I felt like I didn't have a choice but to see what was going on in there. So, I got out from my hiding spot and started making my way up. As I climbed the ladder, I could hear the girls cheering and shrieking like they were playing. But there was another voice in there, and for the first time I started to think this gingerbread man might actually be real. However, once I got up on the porch and peered through the window, I saw a very different sight. There was but one tiny room covered wall to wall in photos of girls just like my own. She and her friends were standing in the center of the room in their fairy outfits. Not standing, but posing for someone in the corner. And who else could it have been but a fat old man in a dingy gingerbread costume, taking pictures of them? When I realized what had truly been happening the whole time, I lost control and attacked the bastard. "You piece of stop, it's just pictures, that's I'll kill you." Once I exhausted myself, beating the brakes off that sick freak. I used my last remaining energy to restrain him until the police arrived. It only took them one look to know what was up. Then they arrested him. He was charged and convicted, but probably for only a fraction of the despicable things he did in that so-called gingerbread house. I'm glad that man's horrible trap is no longer endangering anyone, but I just wish it could have been stopped before my daughter got caught up in it. Till this day, I wish I could have kept her away from ever going in there. A secret gingerbread house deep in the forest sounds like something from a fairy tale, but investigators in Seattle say the one they found was anything but, now 56-year-old Daniel Wood faces charges of possession of content of young individuals. An employee for Washington's Natural Resources discovered bedding, food, and a large amount of disturbing explicit content in the treehouse cabin in the Baker-Snoqualmie National Forest. This set off a month-long investigation that eventually led to Wood. Forest Service employees had known about the treehouse for about 7 years, but nobody knew exactly who had built it. The last time it had been inspected was nearly 3 years ago. Apparently, it looked like a gingerbread house on the outside. The cabin was dark brown in color and built approximately 8 FT off the ground. There was a porch around the structure, a front door and windows on the side, as well as a pitched roof and a ladder from the ground to the porch. But when the employee looked inside, he found something startling. On all 4 walls were framed pictures of fairy-like figures, or of what appeared to be younger individuals. The employee took some of the photos to show to law enforcement, and then returned with a detective, who then found an envelope that contained more disturbing images, along with an SD card, uncovering even more images on it. Eventually, investigators were able to match Wood's DNA to samples collected from a paper cup found in the cabin. Woods was charged accordingly. Every year I would drive out of town to visit my relatives for Christmas. The house was about an hour-and-a-half drive. To be honest, I was used to the drive, but the last time I went, I dealt with the heaviest snowstorm of my life. During the middle of the day, I could barely see past my headlights. Then, on some random stretch of road in the middle of goddamn nowhere, my car broke down. I pulled over and tried restarting it, but I got nothing. I stepped out and popped the hood open, but I couldn't see what was wrong. I didn't have any phone service either, and as long as I waited, nobody came down the road. Already running out of options, the sun began to set on me, and I became desperate as hell. I looked into the woods, searching for a driveway, a mailbox, anything. There was something out there, a faint, flickering red and green light. I knew I could still reach it, so rather than risk freezing to death in my car overnight, I headed for the lights. Of course, they turned out to be deeper into the forest than I anticipated. It was too late to turn back, though, so I pressed forward. I sincerely hoped I was not heading for some empty industrial building, but when I finally came to a clearing, I was pleasantly surprised. In my hour of need, I had stumbled upon a gingerbread house. It was the nicest one I'd ever seen, as decorated as any miniature, but life-size, and there were lights on, too. Given how secluded an area I was in, it seemed like luck was on my side. With a numb, nearly frost-beaten smile, I knocked on the door. "Wow, I can't believe it. What do you want? I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you a real gingerbread man? Piss off. Wait, I'm sorry. That's not why I'm here. I need help, really. My car broke down on the road up there, and I'm freezing to death. I just need to borrow your phone or get a lift or anything you can do to help me. Please. You think people just do things for free out here?" "Well, no. I mean, I'll pay you if you want. I really need your help, all right. Here, that's all the cash I brought for my trip. $200. All right, get inside. Oh, thank you, but don't touch anything." The gingerbread man living in that house looked like the real thing, but he had none of the jolly attitude. Still, he let me into his house before I froze to death, albeit with some strict stipulations. I was allowed to sit by the fireplace and warm up, and that was it. Meanwhile, the gingerbread man made me hand over my keys, offering to go out and fix the car by himself. Understandably, I was hesitant to let go of my keys, but I figured since I was going to be alone in his house, it wouldn't make sense for him to steal my car. After stashing my money away, he went out in the snowstorm and started making his way to my car. At first, I obeyed the gingerbread man's rules. I sat by the fire and warmed up, but after some time I got nosy and decided to explore his house. I figured he was at my car, still figuring things out. Eventually, I could no longer resist the urge, so I got up and crept down the hallway. I wanted to peek behind its doors and uncover the secrets of this gingerbread house. If I didn't leave a trace, I could sit back down at the fireplace before the gingerbread man got back. I'm sorry. I thought I told you to stay put. Thanks for giving me an excuse to give you my candy cane, kill you, and make sure nobody ever finds out. Green heat. Every Christmas, I can't stop thinking about something that happened to me around this time of year. It's the most infuriatingly terrifying thing I have ever went through as a deputy. A life-or-death experience with a psychotic gingerbread man. I don't call him that because he had some obese obsession with cookies, or because his house was made of sugary cardboard. I call him that because of how he taunted us with that damn nursery rhyme. "I'm the gingerbread man, catch me if you can. We've been after this guy for weeks." It was December, or as some people say, robbing season, so burglaries were up, but not like this. We had a string of devastating home invasions, dozens of families and livelihoods destroyed, terrorized by a burglar who seemed to care more about traumatizing people than stealing their belongings for money. At one point we thought we had him cornered. We studied his habits, found a vacant home, staged it as the perfect bait. The second he broke into the property, the deputies on watch called us in. Half the force came to surround the house. I parked on the street corner just down the block near a patch of trees. I listened to the radio as the first deputies charged in hoping to catch him by surprise, but then the bastard weaseled out of the house. Seconds after hearing the call out, I saw the perp fleeing. He was headed for the woods, so I got out of my car and chased after him. I was the closest one to him and the faster runner on the force, so I caught up to him just as he cut in between the trees. I wasn't letting him out of my sight. I knew he'd been running for longer than I had, so I just had to wait for him to get winded. Then I had a chance. As soon as he started to slow up, I went through my options. I could shoot him, but even after what he'd done, did that make it okay for me to take his life? I could tase him, but if he remained a moving target, my chances of hitting him with a shock were even worse than with a bullet. Finally, when he got within arm's reach, I just grabbed him. I took hold of his elbow as it swung back and I yanked it. He tripped, fell into the snow, and I immediately crashed on top of him. I thought for sure I had him. I thought there was no way he had it in him to keep going. Stop, you're under arrest. I'm the gingerbread man. Catch me if you can. Suddenly, his arm slipped out of my hands, and that's when he started using my face as a punching bag. He attacked me with everything he had and even whipped me with some tree branches nearby. And then out of nowhere, the perp charged and immediately landed another hit, and then another until I staggered backwards, trying to regain my equilibrium. But the next thing I knew, he was on top of me. In an instant, the odds turned against my favor, and now I was struggling to keep him from doing me in for good. His hands went to my holster. I felt him pull at it, trying to get the gun out. I put both hands and everything I had to keep him from taking it. Finally, I heard the shouting and footsteps of the other deputies pursuing us. Back up. The perp heard it too, and he gave up on trying to take my gun. He gave one last smug look before getting off me and running deeper into the forest. Then, a moment later, the others arrived. Someone stopped to help me as the others remained in pursuit. While badly beaten, I was able to get to my feet and rejoin the search effort. After that, the evening continued to devolve. We chased after him, fighting through a maze of trees, and then the storm rolled in. The snow buried our boots, and the freezing wind froze us to our cores. Not even the helicopters, with their blinding spotlights, could catch a glimpse in the flurry of manic weather that hindered us. The bastard got away, and then to add insult to injury, he posted that infamous message on Facebook. They call me the gingerbread man. Catch me if you can. I'm running as fast as I can. We were humiliated, but none worse than me. We mobilized even stronger as soon as the weather cleared. It took a few more days, but that bitter sting of a failed sting operation wouldn't let us rest until we caught him. At last, we tracked him down to a sinister hideout, an occupied home, which he had broken into, but seemingly never left. We surmised he must still be hiding somewhere in there, lurking in some dark corner. With a chip on my shoulder, I was among the team that found him in the attic. There was nowhere for him to run then, and I wasn't alone either. In the face of our overwhelming numbers, he gave up without any more fighting. Yet he wouldn't stop smiling at me. I'll never forget that look on his face, the face of the gingerbread man. The gingerbread man is a children's story about a cookie that runs away from those who try to eat him. But in this case, police say they've caught the real gingerbread man, a Pittsburgh area burglary suspect who referred to the nursery rhyme in taunting authorities who couldn't catch up to him. Police say 25-year-old Heath Emery Miller was trying to hide in the attic of a home where police found him on Wednesday. Emery is wanted on several warrants for multiple burglaries. On Monday, he escaped into the woods after police thought they had him cornered. At night, Miller posted on Facebook saying, "They call me the gingerbread man. Catch me if you can. I'm running as fast as I can." Miller was arrested and charged accordingly. Heat. A lot of the stories I cover start with something small, like a feeling you brush off or a detail you tell yourself isn't important. And honestly, that's not too different from how a lot of us treat our own health, like a weird pain or just the mental stress of knowing you probably should see a doctor, but putting it off anyway. I caught myself doing the same thing, telling myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. That's when I used ZocDoc, and it actually made the whole process painless. ZocDoc is a free website that lets you search for in-network doctors, compare them by specialty, see real appointment availability, and book instantly. In many cases, you can get in within just a couple of days. You can read verified patient reviews, check out doctor profiles, and choose someone you're genuinely comfortable with no awkward phone calls. What I loved was being able to find a doctor who had next-day availability and reviews that specifically mentioned listening and taking patients seriously. That matters because walking into an appointment already feels stressful enough. So if you've been avoiding a doctor's visit or just want an easier way to find someone you actually trust, head over to MR.SHADOW and see what's available in your area. It only takes a few clicks. I went camping alone last winter with my dog Roscoe, and it's something I'll never do again. I had taken a few days off work and wanted to get away from people. I loaded my truck with my gear and drove up a long, narrow trail that cut deep into a state forest. The road was barely maintained, covered in packed snow and ice, and there were no other cars anywhere. After driving for almost an hour, I parked at a small pull-off that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. From there, I hiked another 20 minutes with my pack and Roscoe, until I reached a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The snow was deep and untouched. There were no footprints or signs of anyone else being around recently. That was what I wanted. I set my pack down, cleared a spot for a tent, and let Roscoe wander around while I worked. He stayed close, sniffing the snow in the trees and just jumping around playing. I pitched the tent, staked it down hard because the ground was frozen, and laid out my sleeping pad and rated sleeping bag inside. I knew it was going to be a cold night, well below freezing, so I layered properly. Thermal base layers, thick socks, a fleece, and a heavy jacket stayed on even after camp was set. Once the tent was ready, I gathered dead wood and built a small fire pit. I started a fire and let it burn down until I had a steady flame. I cooked dinner over it, just a simple meal, and sat on a log eating while Roscoe lay near the fire. The woods were quiet in that deep winter way where sound feels almost non-existent. I learned a long time ago from my dad that snow actually absorbs sound. After I ate, Roscoe suddenly stood up and started barking toward the trees. It didn't concern me at first. Deer were everywhere out there, and he had barked at them before. I told him to relax, and he did after a minute, sitting back down. I checked the time and decided I'd stay up a bit longer by the fire before turning in. I always carried a handgun when camping in remote places, and it was holstered at my side like it always was. I felt fine at that point. About 20 minutes later, Roscoe started barking again, louder this time. Then I heard it, too. Footsteps moving through the snow somewhere out in the woods. I stood up and listened. The steps stopped, then started again. Roscoe went from barking to growling, then suddenly went silent. He stood staring straight ahead toward the trees. That was when I felt uneasy. I followed his gaze and saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Someone was standing there, half hidden in the darkness, just barely lit by the fire. I called out saying that he scared me and telling Roscoe it was okay. The figure didn't move at first. Then he stepped forward slightly enough for me to see that it was a man. He asked what I was doing out there, that deep in the woods. His tone wasn't friendly. I told him I was just getting out into nature with my dog. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there watching me. I could feel the situation turning wrong. I told him calmly that I was armed. The man slightly laughed and said something about me threatening him instead of inviting him to join me, and asked where my hospitality was. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, his footsteps fading into the woods. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the trees. Roscoe stayed close to me. I didn't like any of it, but eventually I told myself he was gone. I put out the fire carefully, throwing snow on it and stirring the ashes until there was nothing left that could glow. I didn't want light drawing attention. I crawled into my tent and sealed it up. Inside, I did everything I could to stay warm. I laid my sleeping pad down to keep the cold ground from draining heat from my body. I stayed fully dressed, pulled on a knit hat, and cinched my sleeping bag tight around my shoulders. I kept a hand warmer near my core and another near my feet. Roscoe curled up next to me, his body heat helping more than anything. I lay there listening to the woods, or rather the extreme silence. After a while, Roscoe started growling again. Then I heard what he was growling at. Footsteps in the snow. They stopped and Roscoe quieted, but his ears were still perked up. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time and slower than before. They came right up to the tent and stopped. Roscoe began howling loudly. I whispered for him to stop, terrified of drawing attention. When he did stop, he went back to growling. Whoever it was just stood outside the tent. I could hear subtle movement like the shift of weight in the snow. I had my gun in my hand now, but I didn't want to make threats. I didn't want to be forced to follow through with the threats. I have never actually shot anyone, and I don't think I have it in me to kill someone, even in self-defense. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I had a gun and that whoever was there needed to leave now. But realistically, who else could it have been besides that creepy guy from before? There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps again, moving away from the tent. Slowly at first, then faster before disappearing into the woods. I didn't unzip the tent to look out. I stayed frozen for hours. Roscoe stayed alert the entire time, which was the only reason I even felt remotely comfortable eventually nodding off. I certainly wouldn't have if I were alone. I barely slept, drifting off only in short bursts. When the sky finally began to lighten, I packed up as fast as I could at the crack of dawn. We hiked back to my truck and drove away. I never went back to that part of the woods again, and I never will. Creeps like that guy really make life scary sometimes and remind you that you can never really let your guard down. July 4th weekend in 2025. I drove from Melbourne, Florida to Charleston, South Carolina, to visit a good friend named Mark I hadn't seen in years. He was there on an internship for his law program and staying in a house in the city. I was visiting for the weekend and spending the night downstairs on a couch by some windows. After a smooth drive, I arrived in Charleston, and we played some pickleball before nightfall. When the night settled in, I went back downstairs to the couch by the windows that faced another apartment building and a small labyrinth of alleyways with an abandoned house across the street. The next day, after playing more pickleball in the morning and hanging out, we went to the main Charleston market. We walked through it and eventually came out near the docks by the water. That's when we saw him. A man in a wedding suit was shambling down the road near the water. He wore a crisp bow tie and clean dress shoes, and his suit looked freshly pressed. He had long black curly hair and a tan complexion. The market behind us was loud and busy, yet this man moved alone across the street with a slow, detached movement. He didn't notice us and seemed to be in his own world. If we crossed the street, we would have walked straight into him. Instinctively, I wanted to avoid him. I grabbed Mark by the arm and told him we were not crossing. We walked to the right, deeper into the city, and picked up our pace. He was moving slowly, so we created distance easily. I told Mark it was strange and that the guy didn't look homeless. His clothes were too clean, too crisp. Something about him felt wrong. Mark agreed. We kept walking for a while. A few streets later, on another busy stretch of Charleston, we looked toward a shop and saw him again. That same man with the same shambling movement. He was far down the street, diagonal to us, moving at the same slow pace. Somehow he caught up to us, even though there was no clear way he could have reached that spot without us seeing him. I pointed him out to Mark and we both stared. It made no sense. He was in a completely different part of the city but moving exactly the same way. We pushed it aside and kept exploring Charleston. The next day was July 4th, and that night we watched the fireworks on an island about 20 minutes from the city. By then, we had mostly forgotten about the man in the suit. We assumed he was just some strange person wandering around, but something about him set off alarm bells. It felt out of place, wrong. That night, we decided to go on a ghost tour, which we had already planned before the trip. It was my last night in Charleston on July 5th, and the city was packed. It was a busy Saturday night with crowds everywhere, lights pouring from restaurants, and that historical atmosphere Charleston has after sunset. We finished the ghost tour and walked through the main area of the city, filled with restaurants and nightlife. The street was crowded, and a particular wave of people was moving toward us, and quite fast. As this group approached, both Mark and I noticed something at the exact same moment. It was him, the same man in the same wedding suit with the same bow tie, and the same black curly hair shambling in the middle of the crowd, as if he had been placed there. He stood out instantly. His movement was completely different from everyone else. He didn't blend in. No one around him noticed him. Two people were walking right beside him, and he brushed between them without either of them reacting. He kept the same slow, unsettling pace, while the entire crowd moved normally around him. He glanced at us for a brief second, and then continued forward. It was as if he was tied to the movement of the crowd without truly being part of it. Mark and I looked at each other in shock. It made no sense. He didn't belong there, and something in both of us recognized that immediately. We watched him move down the street until the crowd thinned out. When it did, we saw him clearly, still shambling, still moving at that same unnatural pace, disappearing into a darker side street until he turned a corner. We were quiet, not panicking, but deeply unsettled. The same man in the same suit appearing multiple times in different parts of the city, always shambling, always out of place. Both of us knew something was wrong. Later that night, we returned to the house. Mark went upstairs to his room and I went downstairs to sleep. I shut the blinds and tried to settle in. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to a tap on the window. I froze. After a few moments, I forced myself to look. I lifted the blind slightly and looked down the alley. At the far end, I saw the back of a man turning the corner. It was him again. He moved out of sight, but right before he disappeared, he looked back toward the window. I told Mark the next morning. I explained what I saw, and even he admitted that the entire experience was disturbing. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal, and he's extremely logical and grounded, but even he was shaken. As for me, I'm more spiritually sensitive, and this experience stayed with me, and I also know it's with Mark months later. We'll never forget that weekend. The man in the suit felt real and unreal at the same time. Something about all that was off. I drove home to Florida on July 6th, and the image of him turning that corner has stayed with me ever since. I never thought I would be the kind of person who double-checks door locks or memorizes the sounds of my own floorboards, but that changed after 1 week last winter. I live alone in a small house I bought a few years ago, and my routine has been boring and predictable. I work from home, order groceries, go to the gym late at night, and I don't talk to my neighbors much at all. That routine is why it took me longer than it should have to realize something was wrong. It started with a noise I heard around 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was half asleep on the couch with the TV still on low when I heard what sounded like a soft thump near the back of the house. It wasn't loud enough to scare me, and my first thought was that something had fallen in the kitchen, or maybe the house had shifted. We all hear sounds like that in the house or apartment once in a while, right? I muted the TV so I could listen. Nothing else happened. I checked the back door, made sure it was locked, and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed the back door felt different when I opened it. The deadbolt still worked, but the handle felt loose, like it had been twisted too hard. I made a mental note to fix it later. That night, I went to the gym around 11 p.m., like I usually do. Side note, I like an empty gym, and I got back around midnight to 12:30. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my porch light was off, yet I always leave it on. I stood there in my car for a few seconds trying to remember if I had turned it off earlier. Then I convinced myself I probably did. Inside, everything looked normal. I walked through every room just doing an innocent little analysis before going to bed, something I had never done before. On Thursday morning, I woke up to my alarm and noticed my phone was at 12% battery. I always charge it overnight, and I clearly remembered plugging it in. The cable was still connected to my phone, but the charger was no longer connected to the outlet. Weird, I told myself I must have knocked it loose in my sleep. But that explanation didn't really make sense because my phone was still on the nightstand, and not in bed with me. At that moment, my only explanation was I picked up my phone in the middle of the night, accidentally yanked it off the outlet without realizing, and set it back down. I started paying closer attention after that. That night I stayed up later than usual, sitting in the dark with the TV off, just listening. Around 3:00 in the morning, I heard slow thumps coming from the back of the house. Footsteps. I asked myself, "Nah, it can't be." I held my breath, but the thumps seemingly stopped. After a while, I convinced myself the thumps came from outside. I'm in the suburbs. There's of course other people around, even at night. The next day, I found muddy shoe prints on the floor near the back door. The thing is, though, the footprints weren't clear. Like, I couldn't distinctly make out patterns of the bottoms of the shoes, which made it look like someone tried to wipe them off before walking around. My stomach literally skipped a beat. I stood there staring at them, trying to understand how they got there. I hadn't had anyone over. I hadn't gone outside in muddy shoes. I checked the back door again, and this time I noticed faint scratch marks around the lock, like someone had used something thin to pry at it. I called the locksmith and told him I thought my lock was failing. I didn't say anything about the footprints. He replaced the lock that afternoon and told me everything should be fine. That night I pushed a chair under the back door handle and slept with my bedroom door locked, something I never did before then. I woke up just before 4 in the morning to the sound of something tapping lightly on my bedroom door. It wasn't a knock. It sounded like someone testing the door with their fingertips. I stayed completely still, staring at the door, my eyes burning because I refused to blink. The tapping stopped after a minute, and then I heard soft footsteps moving away. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, the chair was still under the back door, but the back door itself was unlocked. The new lock wasn't damaged, it had just been turned, and that's when reality truly set in. I wasn't just imagining these things like I thought I was because I was tired. Someone had been inside my house while I was asleep and knew how to unlock the door from the inside. I called the police and tried to explain without sounding insane. They checked the house, looked around the yard, and told me there was no sign of forced entry, but that was kind of obvious given that I changed the lock. They suggested I might have unlocked the door myself without remembering. I knew that wasn't true, but there was nothing they could do either way. That night, I stayed awake with all the lights on, and a kitchen knife on the table in front of me. Around 2:00 in the morning, I heard something from down in the basement. The basement door, which was just outside of the kitchen, was cracked open. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I stared down the hallway to the cracked open basement door. I walked over to it, peeked down through just what the crack in the door would allow me to see, and I swear it was not my imagination. I saw either at the bottom of the stairs or maybe one of the bottommost steps the outline of someone standing there. I don't know if they were looking up or not. When I realized what I was looking at, I slammed the door shut and sprinted out to my car. I sat in my car as I once again called 911. After police showed up a second time, they entered while I waited in one of their cars. They brought him out of the house in handcuffs a few minutes later. He was barefoot and wearing dark clothes that looked like they had been slept in. He didn't look at me once. I just don't think that he noticed me in the back of the car. They put him in the back of the other car and shut the door. I stayed outside while more officers went back in, and I refused to look at the guy in the back of the car. I was actually shaking even as I talked to the officers. I was stuttering in shock. It took longer than I expected for them to finish the rest of their search. When one of the officers finally came out, he asked how long I had lived there. I told him a few years. He nodded and wrote something down. He asked what time I usually went to the gym and which nights. I told him. He looked back at the house and told me they found food wrappers and bottled water behind the furnace in the basement, along with a phone charger plugged into an outlet down there. He said it looked like someone had been sleeping on the concrete, using old insulation as padding. The man hadn't spoken a word to the officers. The main officer I was talking to told me the likely charges the man would be facing, but that ultimately it would be up to the district attorney. Eventually, they told me I could go back inside. It was days later that I was going through my camera roll to send my friend something when I found a very, very disturbing picture. At first, I had to process how a picture like this could be taken. It was a picture of me in my bed sleeping, taken at 3:11 a.m. It was the same night that I woke up in the morning to my phone being unplugged from the wall outlet. The nightmare became real all over again. I contacted the unit listed on the incident report, and they asked me to come in to digitally transfer the photo for supplemental evidence. I was told that with this photo, he'd likely be facing additional charges such as stalking or even being registered as a sex offender for life. All good things to hear. It doesn't save me, however, from the trauma I'll forever have to live with thinking back to this. I'll never be able to go down into a basement alone at night again in my life. This was God, I don't even know, like 7 or 8 years ago now, maybe 6. I'm not really sure. My life's been a bit chaotic since then, so my head's filled with all sorts of memories and whatnot. Anyway, this was New Year's Eve back when I was still dating my ex, Duda. We were on our way back from a party when everything went down. It must have been well after midnight because I remember being extremely tired. Also, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that driving on New Year's Eve isn't exactly the smartest decision, but we had no choice. The party had been at Duda's friend's place, but we were late additions to the guest list, so there weren't any sleeping arrangements left for us. The drive was actually pretty long, maybe 30 minutes, give or take. The roads were pretty much empty, which I remember being grateful for. It had snowed earlier that day, so the streets were icy as hell, and honestly, the last thing I needed was to be dodging traffic on top of everything else. Duda was half asleep in the passenger seat. I had the heat cranked and some random rock playlist going just to keep myself from drifting off. You know how it is. We were maybe 10 minutes from her place when it happened. Okay. So I don't even know how to describe what I saw. One second the road ahead was completely empty, and the next there was just a woman literally standing in the middle of the street, and she wasn't like crossing or anything. She was just there facing my car like she'd been waiting for us or something. I remember my brain just not being able to process it fast enough. I was already slamming on the brakes before I even realized what I was looking at. And then I realized she was holding a knife. It was down by her side. This massive kitchen knife, the kind you'd use to like carve a turkey or something. My headlights were hitting her full-on, and I could see her face was all twisted up like she was crying or screaming, or maybe both. It was sickly. I don't think I've ever reacted faster in my life. I yanked the wheel to the right to avoid hitting her, but the second I did, she lunged at the car. I heard the impact before I understood what happened. Despite the chaos of everything unfolding so quickly, I knew exactly what happened. She had swung the knife at my car as I passed. Even though I had avoided her, the swerve combined with the ice was just too much. I felt the tires lose grip, and suddenly we were spinning. Duda had woken up by then and immediately started freaking out. I was gripping the wheel like it would actually do something, but there was nothing I could do. The car was not under my control. We spun a full 180 and were basically facing the other direction by the time the car stopped. After recovering from the shock of almost dying, I looked up through the windshield and felt sick all over again because we were now facing the direction we'd come from, which meant we were facing the woman. She was maybe 30 ft away, still holding the knife, illuminated by my headlights like something out of a horror movie. And she was limping toward us like she was trying to move fast, but she was clearly injured. She was also screaming something I couldn't understand. Just this guttural, incoherent noise that sounded more like an animal than a person. It was, and probably still is, the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed with my own two eyes. I remember Duda yelling at me to do something, but I was just frozen. I couldn't look away from this woman lurching toward us. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was all matted and wild. I don't know if she was on drugs or having some kind of mental breakdown or what, but there was nothing behind her eyes. There was nothing there. It honestly looked like she was a dead person walking. She was maybe 15 ft away when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I threw the car in drive and slammed on the gas. The tires spun on the ice for this terrifying second before catching, and we started moving. I thought we were clear, like I thought that was it, but of course I was wrong. I don't know how she moved that fast. Like 1 second she was in front of the car, and the next she was on it. She threw herself onto the hood, and I felt the whole car shudder from the impact. Duda was screaming, I was cursing, and this woman was clinging to the hood of my car with one hand while stabbing the windshield with the other, just like over and over again. I felt like she was trying to get into my car and kill me. I felt like I was going to die. I couldn't see or think. I just started swerving the wheel back and forth as hard as I could. The woman was sliding around on the hood, but she wouldn't let go. She was still screaming that horrible wordless scream, and her face was inches from the glass. And I swear to God, her eyes were locked on mine the entire time. On the third or fourth swerve, she finally lost her grip. I watched her roll off the side of the hood and hit the pavement really hard before sliding into the shoulder. The car fishtailed again, but I managed to keep it under control this time. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her lying there. She wasn't moving. Part of me wanted to stop. I know that sounds insane given what just happened, but I thought maybe I'd killed her. Like maybe she was just some mentally ill person who needed help, and I just killed her. Duda grabbed my arm and told me not to stop. She was shaking and kept saying we needed to go, that it wasn't our problem, that we couldn't get involved. I said we should at least call the police, but she also shut that down immediately. She said the cops would blame us since we've been drinking, and that there was no way they'd believe our story. She said we'd get arrested or something. Looking back, none of that made sense, but Duda had this way of making everything sound urgent yet logical in the moment. She was always like that, very persuasive and borderline manipulative. Honestly, I left that woman on the side of the road, drove to home, and didn't tell anyone. I still feel sick thinking about it. The damage to my car wasn't even that bad. Just the cracked windshield, the knife marks on my driver's side window, and a few scratches on the hood. Surprisingly, there wasn't even any blood on the car. I got it fixed like a week later, but the guilt stuck with me for months. I kept checking the local news, waiting to see a story about a body found on that road or a missing woman or something, but nothing ever came up. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse, honestly. Part of me wonders if she got up after we left and just walked off into the woods or something. Part of me doesn't want to know. The thing that really messed with me, though, was Duda. She acted like nothing happened. Like within a couple days, she was back to her normal self, making plans, going out with friends, whatever. I brought it up once and she got annoyed with me, telling me I was being dramatic, and that we did what we had to do. I remember just staring at her and thinking like, how can you be so cold about this? A woman tried to kill us, and we might have killed her, and you're willing to just forget about the whole thing. We broke up a few months later for unrelated reasons. Well, mostly unrelated, but I'd be lying if I said that night didn't change how I saw her. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but an experience like that is not something you can easily forget, let alone move on from in 2 days. I might have ended someone's life that night. That deranged woman might have ended my life that night. That's not something you could just forget about. I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad. It's where I met one of my closest friends, a guy named Garrett. His real name is Guo, but when we first met freshman year, he introduced himself by his quote American name, and it just stuck. He's originally from Hong Kong, came to the States to study computer science, and is genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever known. After grad, we went our separate ways geographically. I moved to New York for work, and he went back to Hong Kong for the same reason. We're both in our late 20s now, both doing pretty well career-wise, both single. We try to see each other at least once or twice a year, whether that's him flying out to visit me or me taking a trip to Asia. I know it's pretty fortunate to be able to travel so frequently, so I never take that for granted. This incident happened last New Year's Eve, and I still think about it constantly. I've told a few people, but no one really knows what to make of it, nor do I. Oh, by the way, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. That means when it's midnight in Hong Kong, it's only 11:00 a.m. on December 31st in New York City. Garrett celebrates both the regular New Year and the Chinese New Year. So he was out partying that night, same as me, just half a day earlier. I spent New Year's Eve with my two closest friends in the city, Ryland and Ari. We started at Ryland's apartment for drinks, then made our way to this rooftop party in Williamsburg that one of Ari's co-workers had invited us to. It was honestly pretty fun and decently upscale, at least for Brooklyn. Around 11:30 or so, I started talking to this girl. She was standing near the bar by herself, and I honestly just walked up and introduced myself. We hit it off immediately. She had this energy about her that I can't really describe. Super easy to talk to, funny, engaging. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before she pulled me onto the dance floor. Her name was my tree. I remember asking her to repeat it because I'd never heard it before. She laughed and told me everyone just calls her my tree because that's basically how you pronounce it. I thought that was kind of charming. She pulled out a pen and spelled it for me on my hand just in case I quote forgot. Things escalated quickly from there. We danced, talked some more, and kissed at midnight. By around 12:30, she asked if I wanted to get out of there. So, we grabbed an Uber back to my place in the East Village. I'll skip the next few details, but I will say it was a great night. We stayed up talking for a while afterward, and I learned a decent amount about her. Here's everything I remember. She was originally from San Diego. She was an artist, more specifically a painter, and she mentioned she used to do graffiti and murals before transitioning to more traditional stuff. Her middle name was Mia, which was also the name of one of her cats. The other cat was named Cosmo. Her birthday was April 28th. Her best friend growing up was from some tiny town in Germany called Hildesheim. Her dad was a patent lawyer. These are random details, I know, but they become important later. Trust me. At some point, she mentioned her clothes smelled like the bar, so I threw them in the wash for her. She borrowed one of my t-shirts to sleep in. We fell asleep not long after that. I can't remember really what time it was. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave after hookups, it happens. I figured she slipped out early to avoid any awkwardness, which was fine. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. The first thing was my apartment door. I have a standard lock that you can only lock from the outside with a key, meaning it doesn't auto-lock. When I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed the lock was still engaged, which meant either she had somehow locked it from the outside without a key, or she'd never left at all. But both of those were impossible scenarios. I checked the rest of the apartment. My place isn't big. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen. There's no second exit. The windows also don't open more than a few inches. I even searched my closet like an idiot, as if she might be hiding in there, but she wasn't. The impossibility of the situation made me start questioning my sanity. I started wondering whether my drunken state had caused me to imagine the whole encounter entirely. I kept pacing around my apartment frantically, as if she would just appear out of some corner and reset everything back to normal. Her clothes were also gone from the dryer, which added to the mystery, and the shirt I lent her was nowhere in sight, proving that she had slept over, but she was nowhere. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what the hell had happened, but no explanation I could come up with made sense. To make matters worse, I soon realized that I never got her number or any form of contact at all for that matter. For the rest of the day, I tried to piece together everything I could remember about her. The details I listed earlier, that's pretty much everything. I kept repeating them in my head because I knew I'd forget eventually. Later that afternoon, I randomly felt compelled to call Garrett. I don't know why exactly. It was just a super bizarre impulse that just kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't like I had anything specific to tell him. I just had this weird urge to ring him. We caught up for a bit, talked about work, talked about our respective New Year's celebrations, the usual stuff. He seemed a little off, though. Eventually, I asked him what was wrong. He sighed and told me he met a girl the night before. They had hit it off, gone back to his place, and she left the next morning without saying goodbye. No number or contact or anything, and he was bummed about it. I laughed and told him the exact same thing happened to me, like the exact same thing, but here's where things get really freaky. He told me her name was Matra, like my tree. I felt this weird chill run through me. I asked him to describe her, and he started listing details. Everything matched up almost perfectly. Her birthday was April 28th. She was from San Diego, a painter who used to do graffiti. I cut him off before he could finish and asked if she had a cat named Mia. That's when he went a little silent before saying yes. You could imagine what happened next. The two of us spent like 15 minutes just listing as many things as we could remember about her, and all of it lined up. It was actually kind of horrifying. It gets worse, though. He actually had pictures with her, something I didn't have, and he showed them to me. It was the exact same girl. I'm 100% certain. We tried to rationalize it, but every explanation we could come up with was ridiculous. And here's the thing, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. Garrett met her around 11:00 p.m. on December 31st, Hong Kong time. I met her at around 11:30 p.m. on December 31st, New York time. That's roughly a 12-hour difference, but a flight from Hong Kong to New York takes at least 15 hours, and it's usually longer, more like 16 or 17. Even if she had somehow gotten on a plane the second she left Garrett's apartment, she couldn't have made it to that rooftop party in Williamsburg in time. The math didn't work. It was literally impossible. And even if we ignore the flight time somehow, how would she have known to go to that exact party? How would she have ended up talking to me? How would she have known to use the same name, the same details, the same everything? I still don't have answers to any of these questions. Neither does Garrett. We've talked about it probably a dozen times since then, and we always end up at the same place. We don't know what happened, and we probably never will. Neither one of us saw that girl again. The thing that messes with me the most is how real it all felt. I know for a fact that she wasn't some drunken hallucination. I literally talked to her for hours. She slept in my bed, and then she just vanished from a locked apartment with no other exits. Garrett and I don't really know what to do with this. We've both tried looking her up online, but Maitre with no last name and only vague details about being an artist from San Diego doesn't exactly narrow things down. We found nothing. New Year's Eve is fast approaching, which is why this is all fresh in my head again. Usually, the insanity of crazy, unexplainable experiences fades over time, But for some reason, it feels like the opposite for me. The more time passes, the freakier it is to think about the possibility that I may have slept with a ghost on New Year's Eve. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't have a better explanation for what happened. This story is one of my dad's. Before he had kids, my dad and my mom used to travel a lot. He had made some smart business moves in his mid-20s, so he had money to spend and the free time to spend it. They were both big skiers, but the only good skiing that was accessible to New York City was in Vermont. So over the years they actually purchased a few lodges up there. The first one was in Lello. They bought it from some guy named Mr. Black, who lived on West End Avenue in the city. It was this old black shuttered place that my dad always referred to as the Black House, partly because of the shutters and partly because of the previous owner's last name. They'd sell quarter shares to friends and cycle things out every few months to help cover the costs. They kept the place for a few years before eventually switching to a second property. The second lodge was about halfway between Lello and Rutland, right along Route 100 and what locals called the Lake District. There are like 5 lakes in a row along that stretch of road, and the house sat right on the edge of one of them. My dad's friend, Victor, and his wife, Lisa, went in on that one with them. Victor and my dad had been close since college, and the 4 of them would take trips up there together pretty regularly. This happened one New Year's Eve. I can't remember exactly what year, but it was obviously before I was born. Lisa and my mom were away for a friend's wedding or something. I can't really remember the specifics, but it's not that important. What matters is that Victor and my dad decided to take a trip up to Vermont by themselves to ring in the new year. It was the night of December 31st. The 2 of them were upstairs cracking a few beers and just catching up. The upstairs of that lodge had these full-length windows that looked out over the lake, so they'd sit up there, listen to music, and watch the snow. It was snowing, of course, but not so heavily that you felt trapped. My dad said it was really peaceful that night. One of those nights you share with a good friend where you're both just happy to be far away from everything. They had the radio on, waiting to hear the countdown from Times Square. And then all of a sudden, things got crazy. They were mid-conversation when a huge flash of light came from somewhere across the lake. My dad said his first thought was fireworks, but the flash didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground up, and there was no sound, just the silent, blinding light. Victor stood up and walked over to the window, trying to make something out across the lake. My dad asked what he was looking at, and Victor said he thought he saw something moving out there. It was dark, obviously, but there was enough visibility from the snow on the frozen lake that you could see if you concentrated. So after a few seconds, Victor becomes convinced that there's a person out there. My dad told him that was impossible. There were no houses on that side of the lake. There were no trails, no roads, no anything. It was just pure woods on the other side of the lake. But Victor wasn't having it. He started throwing on his coat and boots, saying he was going to take a look. My dad tried to talk him out of it, but Victor was already halfway down the stairs. My dad grabbed his jacket and followed. The 2 of them burst out onto the back deck, and that's when they heard a voice, a young voice. It sounded like a little boy yelling, "Help," over and over again. My dad said it was faint at first, but unmistakable. There was definitely a child screaming for help somewhere out in that frozen lake. It had been well below freezing for months, so the lake was completely solid, no question about it. My dad said they didn't even think twice. They just started walking across. As they got closer, they could make out a figure standing on the ice, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the far bank. It was small, a kid for sure. My dad said he could see the shape of him against the snow. But then there was another flash. My dad said it was so bright he had to shield his face and drop to his knees. He couldn't see anything for a few seconds. Then, when he finally opened his eyes and looked up, the kid was just gone. There was nothing out there but empty ice and snow. My dad said that's when he and Victor went from curious to terrified. They turned around and started racing back toward the house. My dad said he was running as fast as he could without slipping. Victor was a few steps ahead of him when he suddenly yelled and pointed up at the house. He was saying there was someone in the window, but not an adult, a little boy. My dad looked up, but didn't see anything besides the dark glass reflecting the snow. Victor swore up and down that he saw a kid standing right there looking down at them. My dad didn't know what to say. He just wanted to get inside. They made it back to the house and searched the whole place. Every room, every closet, every corner, but there was no one there. The doors were all locked and the windows were shut. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. They decided to call it a night after that. My dad said neither of them really wanted to talk about what happened. They just went to their rooms and tried to sleep. Neither of them had even noticed midnight come and go. My dad woke up twice that night. Both times he swore he heard a child laughing somewhere in the house. He lay there in the dark listening, but it always stopped before he could figure out where it was coming from. The thing that freaked him out the most wasn't the kid on the lake or the figure in the snow. It was the light, that bright, blinding flash that came out of nowhere. He said he and Victor talked about it for years afterward, trying to come up with some kind of explanation. Lightning, a flare, fireworks from some distant town, but nothing made sense. There was simply no source. It just happened twice, and then it was over. They ended up cutting the trip short. My dad said they never talked about that night with my mom or Lisa. Not until years afterward, at least. My dad still doesn't know what happened out there. He's told me this story maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, and every time he gets to the part about the light, he just kind of trails off. I asked him once if he thought it was something supernatural, and he just shrugged and said he didn't know what else it could have been.